Hello, my name is Kevindex, and welcome to my new series, Digital Diagnosis. This will be a series where we psychoanalyze characters from video games in order to understand their worlds, thoughts, and actions. Before I begin, I'd like to mention that I am a clinical mental health counselor in training, meaning I do not yet have my license to practice therapy, but I'm in the progress of obtaining my master's, which will allow me to obtain my license and begin practicing. This video will be strictly for entertainment and educational purposes, and should in no way, shape, or form serve as a replacement for counseling services. This also should go without saying, but please do not utilize any techniques seen in this video in order to analyze real-life people. Again, this video is for entertainment purposes only, and will ever only feature or reference fictional characters. Additionally, it is important to understand that mental health disorders do not define an individual. For example, if I say that a character may have obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, it does not mean that all of those with OCD have the same behaviors, compulsions, and tendencies as the character, and vice versa. In other words, we do not aim to pathologize here. Everyone is their own person, and every diagnosis is different. I also do want to mention that there will be some triggers in this video, such as discussions about suicidal ideation and different mental disorders. If any of that is triggering for you, I do suggest that you click off this video. But without further ado, welcome to Digital Diagnosis. When diagnosing a character like Flowey the Flower, I think it would be easier to work backwards rather than forwards, using my knowledge and understanding of who Flowey is and how they act in order to spitball some potential diagnoses that could apply. From there, I will go through the diagnostic criteria as outlined in the DSM-5 TR in order to see if Flowey meets the required number of criteria in order to qualify for that diagnosis. In order to keep this video relatively organized, I'm going to break it down into 3 different sections. I've gone through the DSM and selected the 3 disorders that I feel fit Flowey best, or rather, could fit Flowey best, and so in each section we're going to go through the disorders, explain them, define them, and go through their diagnostic criteria to see if Flowey meets them. For each criteria that I determine Flowey does meet, I will give a rationale and explain what evidence from the games is fueling that rationale. Later, in the final session, I will bring everything back together and give my final diagnosis. For those familiar with the DSM and with this field, I won't be including Z-codes in my diagnosis today. Considering this is the first episode of Digital Diagnosis, I'm looking to keep things relatively simple. Should I see success with this series, however, I will undoubtedly be getting more detailed and more thorough with my content, which would include adding Z-codes to the final diagnosis. I want to start off this section with what I consider to be the least likely of the 3 diagnoses that I've landed on for this video: borderline personality disorder, or BPD for short. BPD is described in the DSM-5 TR as a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects, and marked impulsivity beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. Those with BPD are indicated by 5 or more of the following criteria. 1. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. 2. A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. 3. Identity disturbance, markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. 4. Impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging, for example, spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, or binge eating. 5. Recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, threats, or self-mutilating behavior. Affective instability, this is number 6 by the way, affective instability due to marked reactivity of mood, for example, intense episodic dysphoria, irritability, or anxiety, usually lasting a few hours and only rarely more than a few days. 7. Chronic feelings of emptiness. 8. inappropriate, intense anger, or difficulty controlling anger, for example, frequent displays of temper, constant anger, or recurrent physical fights. And 9, transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. From my own understanding of Flowey, I would say that Flowey meets exactly 5 of these criteria, which, under normal circumstances, would allow a clinician to reach the conclusion that Flowey indeed has borderline personality disorder. But I don't think it's that simple. You see, one of the criteria which Flowey meets is number 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. As a clinician, it's important to understand the root of a behavior or feeling in order to properly assess if it's being caused by something diagnosable or if there's other factors at play. In this case, there is a factor which is directly causing this feeling of emptiness. You see, in Undertale, the soul is a tangible force or object. It is something that can be removed, and doing so can cause the being with no soul to become a husk of who they once were. This is exactly what leads Flowey to feeling so empty and unfulfilled. They literally lack a soul. For this purpose, I struggle to say if Flowey truly meets the criteria for BPD, or if elements of a video game are interfering with the diagnosis. I feel that specifically with video game characters, you inherently have to take some liberties in order to actually make a video like this, especially considering Flowey with the soul and without the soul are two entirely different beings. For the purposes of this video, I think I will look at Flowey's behaviors under the same lens regardless of where I believe these behaviors may originate from. In the real world, I would never recommend this, as medications or other environmental stressors could have a profound impact on behavior, but here I think it's okay. All of that to say, Flowey does not meet the criteria, but before reaching any conclusions, I would like to do some differential diagnosis testing and look at some other potential diagnoses before reaching any conclusions. Before moving on, I would like to go back and just quickly cover the criteria that I believe Flowey met and why I feel they meet them. So first, let's discuss criteria number 1, which was frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. This was portrayed pretty clearly in Undertale when Flowey is speaking to the player, basically begging them not to leave. You see, Flowey has been alone in the underground for quite a while. Being the only being that has the ability to save and reload makes Flowey effectively immortal. This has created an environment where Flowey feels very lonely and, quite frankly, would do anything to avoid being abandoned. Number 2, a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation is also seen with Flowey's relationship with the player and their relationship with Kara by extension. You see, Flowey seems to change between calling the player stupid and also acting as though the player is their only friend, their only partner in this world. A switch up between putting the player down and putting them on a pedestal, being the only person who can possibly give them any company in this lonely world. For that simple reason, I feel that Flowey meets criteria 2. We already discussed criteria 7, which was chronic feelings of emptiness. I believe I misspoke before and said that Flowey does not meet the criteria for borderline personality disorder. I do want to make an edit to that. Under my new rule of not taking video game logic into account too much and just looking at things how they are, Flowey does meet the criteria for number 7, as Flowey does mention a feeling of emptiness as they're describing being revived into a flower, and also Flowey has no soul, leading to them not really experiencing emotions in a normal manner. Number 8, which is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, can be seen with Flowey pretty much throughout the game. Flowey has a legendary crash out at the end of the game where they turn themselves into a monstrous eldritch horror, And I think that that qualifies as intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. And that's really not the only place that you can see that happening. You can see Flowey get rage baited by a player who has been through the underground before by repeatedly dodging their bullets and making them really, really angry. It's quite hilarious. Finally is number 9, transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. For this one, I had to think outside the box a little. I think that when you look at Flowey and you look at the fact that none of their memories from when Asriel was alive are in there, or if they are, they're pretty deeply baked in there and are just an echo of what they used to be, I would categorize that as a severe dissociative symptom, which could include mass memory loss. So now that we've outlined the first diagnosis, or potential diagnosis rather, of BPD, let's dive into the next potential diagnosis for Flowey, that being narcissistic personality disorder, which is described as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following criteria: a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Number 2, a belief that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions. Before we get to number 3, I want to take a break to mention that the DSM is not exactly gender inclusive and seems to be using he or she pronouns exclusively. Just thought I'd slip that in there before we get to number 3, because these are not exactly written by me. Number 3, a need for excessive admiration. Number 4, a sense of entitlement, which could be unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. Number 5, interpersonally exploitative behavior. Number 6, a lack of empathy. Number 7, envy of others or a belief that others are envious of him or her, again with the exclusionary pronouns. And then finally, a demonstration of arrogant or haughty behaviors or attitudes. Once again, it would seem that Flowey meets 5 of the 9 criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, and here I feel much more confident in whether they meet the criteria or not, as there's far much more evidence for each of these in comparison to the BPD section. So, let's review what Flowey has met from this list. So first off is a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. It should be no shock that someone who is in a constant struggle to obtain the human souls and ascend to godhood would fit this criteria. In fact, I don't think you could hit this criteria harder over the head with a jackhammer. Number 2, a belief that he or she is special and unique, and can only be understood by, or should associate with, other special or high-status people or institutions. Again, this is one-to-one Flowey. Flowey is literally a being that is different, and yet Flowey goes above and beyond, thinking that they are more special, more unique, and more deserving of life than the other beings in the underground. Furthermore, Flowey only really directly associates with the humans, or, other beings that have determination just like they do. There is an interaction with other characters. There's hints that Flowey has interacted with pretty much every character in the underground, as Flowey talks about going through and doing their own genocide route before, but in terms of actual one-to-one conversation and relationships, it's only with humans, so definitely gonna hit the criteria here. Interpersonally exploitative behavior is the next criteria that I believe Flowey meets, and this is for a litany of reasons, but chief among them is the fact that at the end of the game, Papyrus tells everyone that a little flower called them all here, and to me that's just wow. Flowey wanted to get them all in one place to steal their souls, and so Flowey called them all to one place through Papyrus, someone that everyone trusts. This is very clearly, as the criteria describes in parentheses, taking advantage of others to achieve his or her, own ends. The next criteria is a lack of empathy, and in parentheses it specifies that this is an unwillingness to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Flowey openly mocks you if you kill someone in the underground. It's very clear that Flowey is a little more detached from what we would assume are typical behaviors and emotions that are felt by monsters in the underground. I think that this is knocked out of the park by Flowey, and they clearly meet this criteria. Finally is a demonstration of arrogant and haughty behaviors or attitudes. Once again, Flowey's own self-importance, talking about rising to godhood, is most certainly arrogant, and they are sure of themselves up until the very last minute when you have them come crashing down from their arrogance and defeat them. I will admit, based solely off this section, I would be content saying case closed and writing off Flowey as a narcissist. My job isn't done just because I found something that matches with our client here, though. You see, I have one more diagnosis that I want to examine, a disorder that's actually the most common among serial killers. And considering Flowey's true name is Azrael Dreamer, which is of course an anagram for serial murderer, I feel it's more than reasonable to take a closer look at antisocial personality disorder. The DSM-5-TR defines antisocial personality disorder, or APD, as a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation for and of the rights of others, occurring since age 15 years, as indicated by 3 or more of the following. Number 1, failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. 2, deceitfulness, as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. 4, irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. 5, reckless disregard for safety of self or others. 6, consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. And finally 7, a lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. Additionally, there are criteria such as what age this behavior started at, and making sure that the behavior is not occurring exclusively during the course of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Flowey here actually meets 5 of the 7 criteria, once again meeting the criteria for the disorder. Let's discuss which criteria are met. First is failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. While the Underground doesn't exactly have a police force similar to what they have in Deltarune, they do have the Royal Guard, and it can be assumed that going on a murderous rampage, such as what the human does or what the player does in a genocide route, would be cause for Undyne to get concerned. I would assume that in many routes before that Flowey has taken, Undyne has taken issue with their behavior, and so I would say that Flowey definitely meets the criteria for number 1. I feel that Flowey also meets number 2, deceitfulness as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. Quite literally, the first encounter that we have with Flowey in the Underground, we are lied to about happiness pellets, or whatever Flowey calls them. Yes, Flowey basically lies through their teeth. Every other word that comes out of their mouth is a lie. They definitely meet the criteria for number 2. They also meet number 4, irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. Do I really need to explain myself why Flowey meets the criteria that outlines repeated physical fights or assaults? number 5 is also met: reckless disregard for safety of self and others. I think stealing the soul of literally everyone in the general vicinity has them meeting this criteria. Number 7, a lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. Flowey basically plays off every time they kill someone, seeing it as just a game or just another death. Their complete lack of empathy for the death of others is what has them meeting this criteria. Additionally, I thought about adding the failure to plan ahead, as they don't really anticipate the human souls rebelling against them, and, well, that could definitely make them eligible to meet the criteria for number 3, impulsivity, or failure to plan ahead, but I decided to exclude that one, as I don't think that there was any way for them to plan for this. This is not really something that they could have tested without having something backfire on them, so I don't think they meet that criteria. But not to say that it matters in the grand scheme of things, as they meet enough criteria to, get I think it was 3 out of 7, they meet 5. So overall, this was a bit of an unexpected result. Flowey ended up meeting the criteria for all 3 of the discussed disorders, which is not uncommon in more extreme cases. Side note, as I'm writing the script, I actually consulted with my girlfriend here, as we both are in this field, and we both workshopped the best diagnosis for Flowey, given the fact that they have a fairly unique set of circumstances which have led them to becoming who they are today. Typically, in the field of counseling and therapy, you're encouraged to seek consultation with particularly difficult cases that may require another set of eyes, so perhaps this actually helps my video achieve a level of realism. During our conversation, we discussed the BPD diagnosis specifically. I felt as though NPD and APD were pretty solid bets to be comorbid disorders in the case of Flowey, but that BPD was not as likely at this point in time. Flowey definitely has the background to be someone who could develop BPD, but without more examples of impulsivity and suicidal ideation, I felt comfortable in simply downgrading Flowey to, quote, having some features of BPD, or, quote, having features seen in those with BPD. This actually is why differential diagnosis gets its own section in most DSM diagnoses. Often there are disorders which can present as others, or sometimes behaviors which can mimic a disorder when there is none present at all. Okay, so let's take a look back and decide how we might diagnose Flowey. I feel if I was working with Flowey, I might give them a diagnosis of F60.2, Antisocial Personality Disorder, and F60.81, Narcissistic Personality Disorder. I do want to mention, though, that basically this entire video is dismantled the second you attempt to factor in the existence of Asriel. Do we treat them completely separate, as separate people in this context? Do we view one as the result of years of trauma to the other? It is important to remember that these videos are just for fun. My diagnosis of this character is not to be the be-all end-all in this community. It's very possible that there is more in the DSM-5 TR that one can hone in on and ultimately diagnose Flowey with. But considering that Undertale is a small sample of a much larger life, I would rather focus on the larger themes and elements of Flowey's character, rather than zeroing in on one line of dialogue. Well, this is when I hand it over to all of you. I would love to hear what you all think about the case of Flowey the Flower, and how you might go about understanding and analyzing their words, actions, and behaviors. I look forward to reading everyone's thoughts. Also, feel free to give me feedback on the Digital Diagnosis series. This is just one episode of what I would love to be a much larger project for my channel. Continue to recommend me characters to analyze, and I'll continue to create these videos. Until next time, I've been Kevin Dex, and I hope all of you have an amazing day. Peace out.